left unsaid. Days that can't be counted by the time till rent. Tomorrow's just another like the one that comes next. The corner of the highway that leads to the job at the desk by the boss with the elegant watch. The tick of the clock and the tick of the clock mark the moments till the ticking stops.
Today's podcast is with Goldie Chan, who is a brand and storytelling speaker, writer, and content creator. She is also an introvert. She is the founder of Warm Robots, an award-winning social media strategy agency. She has been named the Oprah of LinkedIn. I mean, that's a thing. She was a senior contributor to Forbes and writes for the Archie Comics. Again, this is a multifaceted bio. She has a new book. It's called Personal Branding for Introverts. You're going to love the conversation.
Yes, I have to hold up the book. It's right here.
Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about introverts and maybe divine comedic timing.
Yeah, okay. Well, and before I get to my first question, I was sort of like, do you get is the podcast format easier for you in terms of your introversion, or is it the same thing of like a public speaking type gig?
So I am one of the kinds of introverts that is not scared by public speaking. I really thrive and I love it. And so to me, the podcast is another version of that. The podcast to me, I treat it like a conversation. We were just talking before in the virtual green room, which is the worst way to say that, but we were talking before and very generously, you're like, well, if anything goes wrong, we can always edit it out. And I was saying to you, and you agreed with me, that I like these to be always just conversations. So a podcast, I think, should have some flaws and flubs in it. That's what makes it a podcast, right?
Yeah. Well, in improv, one of the things we say is you make mistakes work for you. So you see them as opportunities. All right. So my first question is usually like after I read the book, and actually after I write down all my notes, I try to think of some sort of connect point. And you gave me a softball in the book. So one of the gifts of working at a theater like the Second City, which is all about training young talent and helping launch their careers, is being able to see them thrive over time. So my wife, Anne, was Amy Poehler's teacher at Second City. And I hired Amy and her best friend, Tina, into the Second City's professional companies. And this is a classic pairing of an extrovert and an introvert, which is basically how we build our ensembles at Second City, because the different styles make the work more interesting and nuanced. And you talk about this in the book, and you do talk about Tina and Amy specifically. And I think it's this idea that introverts can help themselves by pairing with extroverts.
Right. And I'm so glad you pulled that out, because I wasn't sure if people would capture that or if they'd believe me, because I think so few people think of one as being an introvert and one as being an extrovert. I think it's natural for us to think, well, both are extroverts, right? Because they're performers. But you know this because you work with so many young people who are excited to express themselves, but maybe feel a little reticent to do that. Maybe they feel like, I want to be fun and funny, but I feel so uncomfortable being the person that pounds the pavement and is the loud person in the pair. So I'm so glad that you pulled it out. I also want to hear any stories that you have, because everything that I had in my book was, of course, anecdotal. But I think it's so helpful to have introverts who partner with extroverts. I know that in my own life, it's been incredibly helpful to do that. I have had so many moments where I've felt like I don't want to speak up, or I don't want to be a bother. That is my Pooh Bear line of reasoning is I don't want to be a bother, so I'm not going to say anything. And in so many ways, I've had extroverts speak up and help me. So one way is I have a friend, his name is Ted, and he is an amazing extrovert. And he's a creator, he's an artist. So he knows so many introverts, and we occasionally go to the same conference. And when we're at the same conference, he will march right up to people and just say, hi, I'm Ted, and this is what I do. And I kind of lurk in the background. I'm the lurker, and I just kind of patiently wait until he's done. And he'll be like, this is Goldie, and this is what she does. And I think that's what is so magical when an introvert partners with an extrovert. And if there's any extroverts listening to this podcast, please know that you can help introverts in so many ways, and in particular by being the person that introduces them to opportunities.
There was a social scientist we had on the podcast a long time ago who gave a great tip for going to conferences if you are someone who doesn't enjoy networking, which is find a trio. Because when people are in, two, they are one-on-one, they're going to be talking. If you find a trio, one of the people is not going to be in that conversation. So you can sort of get in and immediately have someone who's going to kind of pay attention to you. And I gave this tip to my wife, who is an introvert who also speaks in front of, crowds. She's a teacher, all that stuff. But when she goes to these conferences, it's like, oh, she just hates it.
So I will say this. Very ironically, I called my book tour the No Small Talk book tour because I think so many introverts despise, fear, I'm going to throw all the negative words, small talk. They just don't like to have to talk about the weather or talk about sports or talk about whatever small things that extroverts find easy to use as their connectors. Introverts a lot of times want to get right to the meat of things. They want to talk about things that matter. They want to get very deep very quickly. And so talking about superficial things for an extended period of time is really hard for a lot of introverts.
Alison Wood Brooks has a terrific book called Talk. She's a Harvard professor. And she actually has a whole thing where she talks about the importance of small talk as a way to scale into a conversation. Like you don't need to avoid it. You don't want to live there. That's not a great place to live. But the idea, and this is actually fairly true for when we teach improvisation, which is like, don't get caught up in saying like just the right thing, because guess what? It doesn't exist. And you have no context for understanding if it's a new person, what the right context is going to be. You start and then you may sort of open and you're a good listener. And also, by the way, people, if you take your time in responding to someone, they usually think you're being thoughtful. They don't think this person has nothing to say.
Right. Well, I want to say, first of all, that I did a workshop with introverts at a large conference here in Los Angeles called VidCon. And it was pretty funny because, first of all, for that particular workshop, no one talked to each other. It was the quietest line. There was other lines for other workshops and everybody was talking and meeting each other. No one talked to each other in my line for my introvert workshop. So when we got in there, I said, you're going to not like this, but we're going to do something. So I made everybody, first of all, get up out of their seats. And then everybody looked really scared, which I absolutely get because it was a room full of introverts. And I'm telling them to get out of their seats. And I said, we're going to follow a script. And so I'm sure, Kelly, you appreciate scripts because I'm sure you've worked with them so much over the years. So a script that I gave them was the simplest script in the world. It was simply, hi, my name is, and then I had to pause and say, this is where you fill in your name. Hi, my name is. So for me, it'd be, hi, my name is Goldie. And then you ask, what is your name? And then for Kelly on your end, you would say, my name is Kelly. What are you working on? Or what are you interested in? Or what are you excited about? Or why are you here at this conference? So you'd fill in a what or a why question. And I gave them a very simple question, which is, why are you here at VidCon, right? Why are you here at this thing? And it was literally a conversation that had maybe, and I'm terrible at memorizing. I'm just the worst person at memorizing, but I gave them the simplest script and it was so magical because in this room full of, I want to say 40 people or something, we paired off into twos. So we had maybe 20 pairs and everyone suddenly was talking. And it was a room full of introverts talking to each other because I took that stress away from their brains of, what do I say next? And you can practice this at conferences and in your daily life. You can write down a mini script that you can use that when you go to a conference, you don't have to come up with something. So you can write down, hi, my name is, if that's helpful for you just to start, because you know this, Kelly, I'm sure you talked to so many amazing people who have talked about small talk. It's starting the small talk. That is the most difficult part.
Yeah. So how much do you I didn't think I this is not a question I wrote down. I'm just thinking about it
Right.
right now, which is introversion and sort of generational traits. So
Yes.
one of my favorite jokes from Only Murders in the Building is when Steve Martin and Martin Short are talking, and they were talking about reaching out to Selena Gomez, and Martin Short's like, "Oh, don't call them; they don't like that." And it's, and I know this from my 28-year-old son who does not mind when I call him. And he's like, but you do not, you text, you do not call friends of his age. Is that something that you think is it generational? Is it introversion? Is it something else?
So I think it is both introversion and generational, because I
Okay.
think when you get into the older generations, there's also members of the older generation community that don't like phone calls, right?
No,
And I
fair.
think that that is introversion, but I do agree with you that for the younger generation, I'm part of the millennial generation.
Mhm.
For millennial and younger, it is definitely the rule of thumb is text first and then get approval to call and then call. And
So
also
funny.
definitely don't do Facebook audio or
No.
Facebook voice. I have been assaulted by those things before, and I don't appreciate getting the Facebook call or the Facebook video. Just personally, as both an introvert and someone of the millennial generation, I would rather get personally a text beforehand. But if I'm working closely with somebody and we're in a work situation and we are on an urgent deadline, then I personally don't mind getting phone calls. But if it's for a social reason, I always feel like if you have my phone number, you can text me.
All right. So I'm curious about this because
Yes.
right before we came on the podcast,
Yes.
I'm my LinkedIn world is I have a decent following for a human being, not as big as yours clearly, but I'm being more selective about who I allow to
Right.
connect to me, but I still haven't figured out the right way.
Right.
I clicked on someone because they looked like they had interesting credits, whatever, and what they ended up doing. This is literally like 20
Oh
minutes
no.
ago.
Oh no.
It was a video. They made a video and they're like, "Hey Kelly, I know this is an unusual way maybe to communicate, but you look like you have a really interesting background, and my boss does this, and they're trying to sell me something, and
Of
they
course.
did this video, and it was the first time that had happened to me, and
Hmm.
I gotta be honest, I was of two minds. One, I was like, good for you to try to be a little bit
Right.
interesting, and also, unfortunately, I'm not going to respond to you.
Well, I think, Kelly, that probably comes from your teacher mentality or educator mentality. The good for you, I'm sure, was a good for you. I'm proud of you for trying. It's the
Yeah,
big
yeah,
parent
yeah.
mentality, the mentor mentality. You're like, I love to see you trying. And then the personal mentality is absolutely not. I
No,
think
no,
there was a
not at
no.
all.
And I will say this, as someone with I have friends who have a million followers on LinkedIn. So I have a little over 100,000. So I'm not as big as they are, but it's a pretty sizable following that I have. I get voice notes all the time and I
Mm,
get videos all the time. And I know instantly when it's a sales video or a sales voice note. And I don't listen to or watch them because my inbox is so flooded with messages that the last thing I want to do is necessarily listen to a 5 minute long sales video that I just know in my gut is a sales video. But I think, like you, in the mentor mentality, I'm just like, good for you, because I bet if you do 100 of those, there's maybe one or two people,
mhm.
probably more than that, who respond and are like, wow, I've never gotten one of these before. I'm also looking for what you're selling. And I think that's, I'm not a salesperson, which is what I'm learning with this book. So I'm not a sales trying to, so I think that this is so funny because I'm an introvert. I'm truly an introvert trying to sell a book about introverts to other introverts. And
Mhm.
if you ask me what the magic bullet is, I truly do not know. But as somebody who's not a sales pro, I have to say that it's a numbers game, is what I'm realizing. I think the more people that you reach, the higher your chances are of selling something.
It's funny. My wife released her book last Wednesday, and it's a comedy book, her comedy theory book on Northwestern University Press. And she's an introvert, as I've mentioned.
Right.
And she is so bad at, like, I set up her first like 3 interviews, and they were great, and she did great. But it's like, it is so not in her skin to do. I Here's something that I did not know, and I'm very familiar with Carl Jung's work. I
Yeah.
didn't realize Jung basically defined this term, introversion.
Right. So it was defined so many years ago, right? And I think that over the course of time, because humans, we love to simplify, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that from the early definition of how Carl Jung defined it to now, we associate one word with introversion. And it was also the title of Susan Cain's book, a really
Yeah.
delightful and amazing in-depth book. And that's quiet. And I wanted to specifically write a book that did not have the word quiet in the title, and did not say that the only kinds of introverts that exist are quiet, because I think that we so often minimize all introverts to the one characteristic of quiet, and then also maybe crying in the corner, which I'll do later. So, it's probably pretty accurate. But I think with the word quiet, I have a little section in my book. I was originally going to do, honestly, a full chapter on this. I could do an entire book on this, and that's the loud introvert. I
Mm-hmm.
think that so many introverts get really loud and passionate and excited when they're talking about something that they care about. And I'm sure you've seen this too when you've seen introverts that you've worked with, especially young introverts, when they finally have a voice and they feel very comfortable and safe in a space. And then suddenly they're the loudest person you know, because they are so excited to be there and so excited to share what they care about. And I personally believe that so many introverts are actually loud introverts given the right time and place and people. So I don't believe, and this is, once again, Susan Cain's book, amazing. Please go read it if you haven't read it.
Mm-hmm.
But I personally, my hot take about introverts is that introversion does not equal quiet.
All right, so I'll give you a good example.
Yes.
Steve Carell.
Yes.
Steve Carell is such an introvert, and to the point
Yay.
that I remember when Adam McKay was understudying Stephen Colbert in the main stage here at Chicago, and he hadn't done a lot of work with Carell. He knew him off stage, and of course, if you know him off stage, it's like,
Right.
I can barely talk to this guy. And then suddenly Adam's on stage with Steve Carell, and Steve Carell is like a clown, a masterful, like,
Right.
so
Masterful. Yep.
good. And I remember Adam being like, that is one of the greatest performers I've ever performed with. And it just, you would never know it if you knew him off stage and the way he carries himself. And I got to say, that is more of the norm than the other way.
Yeah, I think that is what I'm talking about. I'm sure you maybe also have your own term for it, but that to me is the loud introvert.
Yeah.
That is someone that when you meet them day to day, it will maybe surprise you. And I will say this, because I have, I suppose, a larger number of followers, and my hilarious nickname is the Oprah of LinkedIn, people expect me to show up in my social life, in my personal life, in a very particular way. And that's to be loud, engaging, everything I say is a gem. And I will be sitting in the corner with the dog or the cat. Whatever animal that person owns or has in their house, I will sit in the corner so quietly, like a mouse, with this animal at a social party, because that is my natural inclination. And I don't necessarily need to be also the center of attention in any social situation, quite frankly, except for one, and that's my birthday party. So that's once a year that I want to be the center of attention. And even then, sometimes I'm okay not being the center of attention. So I think it's helpful to know that, especially with introverts, it's not that there's masks even, but there's sometimes modes that introverts exist in, and both are true, both are real. And I'm sure that if Steve is as much of an introvert that you say he is, I'm sure that after performing, he probably goes home and sleeps for, a day,
Yes.
a week, and just shuts down and is like, he needs to shut down probably before performing, and then he's on. He's the light bulb. He's amazing. And Steve Carell, of course, is just so
Yeah.
wonderful as a performer. I don't know him personally, but I just think his work is great. But I'm sure after he does that great and amazing and original work, then he disappears into the introvert bubble to regenerate into a new form. So
Yeah. So much for us to talk about, because the book isn't just about introversion, it's also about branding. And one of the people you cite as a master of personal branding from history is Cleopatra.
Yes.
Talk about her.
So I think that everyone expects me to cite Cleopatra as a master of branding because she's just so beautiful and stunning. But history books actually say that she likely was not as traditionally beautiful, right? I want to say traditionally because who knows at the time, right?
Yep.
Traditionally, she was not as beautiful as people say, but she was, I think, to me, once again, I guess my second hot take is she was the first person to use a profile picture.
Yeah.
She was the first person to use a profile picture. And the example I use is she had coins made with her side profile. And the reason why she did that is not because she had a beautiful side profile, is because she had a strong nose like her father. And so she wanted everyone to know that she looked like her father, so she would garner more respect, and she would send out papyruses or papyri. I actually don't know what the multiple of that is, though. She would send out papyruses all over her domain that had her words of wisdom, which to me is probably like an early version of Twitter, I guess, of sending out her words of wisdom, and people would collect these papyruses. And it was such a smart distribution system that the coins, their currency, had her side profile, which reminded them of her father. And then she also secondarily had these pamphlets that had her words of wisdom distributed broadly. So she had a platform and she had a profile picture. So was she an early version of TikTok? Who knows?
I mean, the other thing that you mentioned, which I had no idea, is she perfumed her sails.
She perfumed her sails. So when she was arriving, it's almost like getting an alert, like a beep, beep, but instead hers was a nasal, an olfactory alert that you get that she was arriving. And once again, none of this has anything to do with if she was at the time classically good looking or not. It was a very thoughtful and very manufactured and very intelligent way of thinking about personal branding.
So what's interesting, we're talking today, and it's October 21st, 2025.
Yeah.
The podcast that dropped today is with a social scientist named Tomas Chamorro Premusic, and his book is called Don't Be Yourself. And it is a really interesting take on this idea of like, well, what is yourself? Because honestly, we're all many selves.
Yes.
And when people are like, I just want your authentic self, he's like, do we? Do I want your unfiltered opinion? Because I don't think I probably do. And I don't think you probably do that. So this idea of how you manage your perception, and I actually put it in bold because I thought it was a really succinct thing you say. You go, quote, your public identity is the combination of how you present yourself and how others perceive you. Your personal brand is the business component laid over that. So I want to talk through this because I think it's important, because you're talking about a multi-layered situation there. So let's talk about this combo thing, because it is, and I would say this, it's how you present yourself, and way more important how others perceive you with regard to what gets through, right?
Well, I will say the number one question I get is always, what's the difference between personal branding and reputation? And so I say that so reputation is the story others tell about you when you're not in the room. And personal branding is the story that you tell about yourself when you are in the room. And that could be a digital room, right? It doesn't need to be a physical room anymore, because now we live in the age of the internet. And so when I'm thinking about all these layers that we build, so part of it is the story that you create, that you are in control of, right? That you tell other people. And then part of that is the story then that is influenced, hopefully, by the story you tell that other people tell about you. And then how you move forward with those two pieces is your personal brand, is how you are going to be perceived in the career or work marketplace, I recently talked to somebody who is an actor. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, so it's really, I just do this and there's 12
Just go
actors.
to a restaurant.
But
Yeah.
yeah. I open my window and oops, there's an actor. But when I was talking to an actor, and I very briefly and very painfully was an actor, and I'm so glad I'm no longer that. But it just wasn't, it didn't suit me. All that being said, I know some of the pieces of being an actor though, and that's a consistent headshot. So,
Yeah.
and I remember I had an agent, and my agent said, if you change even a single one of your hairs, you need a new headshot, right? If you lose weight, you gain weight, you need a headshot. If you, I don't know, suddenly get a face tattoo, you definitely need a new headshot for that. You need a new headshot every single time. And I think of then headshots as being snapshots of who you are in this moment in time. And that's how you want others to perceive you, which in this case would be casting directors, because they want to cast you exactly as you are in this moment in time. And I think the best personal brands are up to date as possible. They're your headshots. They're these snapshots of you that are as recent as possible, because so many of us have a personal brand that is a decade, 2 decades old, because we've been working for so long that we sometimes don't, and it's completely understandable, we don't pause and say, who am I actually now in this moment in time? And I love that book title, Don't Be Yourself. I would say, first of all, the word authentic is so overused at this point.
That's what he says.
I love to use the word real or genuine, but I think it's helpful to, first of all, use common sense and then narrow down. So if you think common sense wise, if you shared this dark, incredibly terrible aspect of yourself, talking to all the serial killers out there, if you share that publicly, maybe that'll get you in a whole heap of trouble and that'll be bad, but also just don't do that. But if you are saying, okay, I want to be known for being this amazing pen maker, but I also love fly fishing, and maybe those two things are not directly connected, maybe it's better for your personal brand in the workplace to focus on simply being that delightful pen maker, right? And I think that it's helpful to narrow down also, because if we go to a public event or you meet somebody, if somebody, and we've all been in this situation, if somebody comes up to you and says, hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm a horse trainer, a cactus raiser, a microphone aficionado, a plant, etc., I will likely remember one of those, and it's probably not the one that Kelly wants me to remember, right? It's probably, I remember that Kelly's a horse trainer. And you're like, no, that's actually not what I wanted you to remember. I wanted you to remember that I run this amazing podcast for Second City. So, but maybe you said that 10 things down the line, so I don't remember that anymore. I just remember whatever my Swiss cheese brain can hold on to dear life for, because we get so much information. We're so inundated every day with so many different pieces of information. I think it's helpful to sometimes say the one thing that you want to be known for, but also that's a delightful start to a conversation, right?
Right. It's so this is one of the reasons I really enjoyed the book, which is like this stuff is nuanced. It's like they're in one context it's one thing, in another it's another. Yes. We are many things, and that's totally fine. And you're absolutely right. If you start saying your 25 things, no one is going to remember that.
Right.
And then the one thing that comedians know, which is those little quirks and those faults and those things are the things that make you interesting. Right. And the things that people connect to. So you shouldn't be afraid to use those as part, for us, it's absolutely part of our personal brand. And I think in general, I talk about this a lot in leadership, like the leaders who share their struggle, people respond to far more, passionately than ones who just act like they've had it all along. In part because you're up on that stage, you're in that position and you struggled, but you're up there, which means you went through some stuff. And look, we all go through stuff. And I think that and this is becoming more accepted, certainly more accepted than when I was a young person, but we still have a way to go, which is like, we got to normalize these conversations. We have to normalize for how we work with introverts at work, how we work with people on the spectrum at work, how we can appreciate difference to make us stronger, all those things. It is better. It's better than it used to be, but we still have work to do.
I think we have a lot of work to do in order to make the workplace more equitable for everyone and more open and more safe, quite frankly. I
Yeah.
think that there's so many people who are so afraid to express themselves outside the norm because there is such a fear of being excluded from opportunities. And I did a talk at a toy company that everyone would recognize if I said the name, so I'm not going to say the name, but I think that it is a very conservative place actually. And so there's certain things like having colored hair that is not necessarily accepted as a norm there. And so when I spoke there, people came up to me, they're like, wow, I can't believe you have colored hair. And like, is that possible for me? And I hate to say this, but I have to say, use common sense. If you truly believe that it would keep you from opportunities, then, reconsider it. I'm definitely not somebody that says, yes, lose your job, like enjoy the consequences. Like I think especially for folks who work in corporate, you have to use a higher level of common sense.
It's funny. Just last week, I got asked to be part of a club in Chicago, which is not. It's not a club I would ever like choose necessarily to be a part of.
Okay.
And I was going to go for this lunch, and
How many clowns does it have in this club?
no, it's the opposite.
I'm
So
sad.
you're gonna get where I'm going with this,
Okay.
which is so I was supposed to have this lunch, and then one of the head of the club had to cancel, and
Okay.
before that he said, oh hey, I'm gonna be coming from this place, so I'm gonna be dressed casually, which I was like, and it was a cue to me to say, and this is what I said to the thing, I go, I can't remember the last time I wore a suit. Because for me, it was important for me to sort of let them know, like, that's not the world. I'm a business. I can call myself a business person because I've been that in my life, but I'm also in the
Right.
creative arts. What you're seeing right now is normally what I wear,
Right.
which is,
Right.
like a lumberjack shirt. I mean,
Right.
whatever. So, but it was also like hey, I'm fine. Like, but I am not looking to dress that part to
Mm.
be in that world if that's what
Mhm.
you were looking for. And
Mhm.
we'll see what it is. But it was an interesting thing of like, oh, he assumed it would be weird if he came in casual wear. Whereas in my world, if you showed up in a suit, everyone at Second City would be like, who is the Fed? Who's this guy looking to bust?
I think what you were doing and what he was doing is you were expectation setting. You were level
Yes.
setting both in your own ways, right? He was expectation level setting. He said, "Hey, I'm very sorry, but this is the thing I'm doing outside the norm." And then you let him know, this is my norm. This
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
completely different universe, this is my norm. So I hope that's okay. And I think what you did was so great and so powerful because you already set that expectation now that he knows that if you join this group, you aren't going to show up every week in a
Mhm.
suit. You just aren't going to do that. And that is not the way that you operate. And I think that that's really good. And that to me is also, we haven't talked about this at all, but introverts and boundaries, right?
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
think boundaries are healthy for every single person out there. And I think giving ourselves healthy boundaries is really good.
And I'll also say this. I can get away with that because I have a certain amount of status and a certain amount of privilege. And I'm at a point
Mm-hmm.
in my career.
Yeah.
If I was in my 20s, I probably should have gotten the suit and gone on if I got that opportunity. So I think
Right.
I think this is important because I think this is something, I've eternally worked with young people because it's like I'm the only one who gets
Yeah.
older here. Everyone keeps coming in, they're young. And my wife and I both, but that way. And one of the things that I've sort of discovered over time is as I've gotten older, recognizing for younger people, I've sort of be like,
Yeah.
oh, if you want to work in the arts in your like 20s to 30s, and I have a son who's an actor, it's like
Right.
it's a different experience. It is a grind. It is
Yeah.
like it would be the same if you were a musician. I mean, you're going to play the back of a crappy club for very little money to get good, to get the gig. It doesn't just happen that you get the big stage, and not everyone knows that or has experienced that, especially if
Right.
they've had a lot of stuff taken care of for them.
Right.
And it's interesting because I mean, we don't talk that much about how you grew up in the book.
Hmm.
And you strike me as someone who had to do work.
I will say this. I grew up, so I was born and raised around Oakland, California. So born
Okay.
in Oakland, California. And I
Yep.
split my time between Oakland, Chinatown, and I always like to think about it in terms of food because I love food. So I think between Oakland, Chinatown's dim sum, which is better than San Francisco Chinatown. Sorry for that hot take. And also the soul food that Oakland just classically has. So
Hmm.
I grew up in that universe of living between multiple cultures. And also, yes, I was very much a person that had to get opportunities and create opportunities and work to make things. And I started clubs in high school and I did all those things because I was a naturally and still am a naturally curious person. And I think that also when you aren't handed, I don't know, a BMW when you turn 18 or I don't know what it
Hmm.
is for kids these days. That's how much I don't know about that
Yeah.
particular wealth ecosystem. But I do know that when you aren't necessarily handed opportunities, but you are a curious person, you are a go-getter kind of person, that you will create those opportunities for yourself. And that's what gives me joy when I've been mentoring this young person because I work with Adobe a lot. And so Adobe has a mentorship program. So this is a young person who wants to be an artist, a creative. And it's so good to me to meet somebody who wants to work hard and wants to be really intelligent about the way that they work. So work hard, work smart. And so she isn't just saying, I'm just going to do all this work and hope that works. She's really strategic and she's trying to use the information that she has in order to be successful. So when she graduates, she will be able to get a job in an incredibly, incredibly competitive job market. And I feel so sorry that she has to compete in that
Yeah.
job market as such an intelligent young person, but she has to. So I'm doing my best as her mentor to say, have you thought about this? Try this and try that, which I'm sure you do all the time with these young people when they're going out for auditions or
Hmm.
whatever they're doing in that universe. But I think so much of it comes down to curiosity and being really smart about what you're trying to do. And then also being a little stupid,
Hmm.
failing. And I think
Hmm.
having stupid failures is really important, especially
Huge.
when you're young. I wish at least a few major stupid failures on you when you're young and when you can recover easily, especially in your 20s, in your teens and your 20s.
It's funny. So when I interviewed my wife the other day for her new book, and there was a specific line from her book. And I have it here because I have to talk to her again for a podcast like this.
Yay.
And she writes in the book, "quote I used to advise my students to value failure, but that's silly. No one really values failure. Failure sucks. What we need to value is the thing that put us into the position to fail in the first place, taking a risk."
Yes. That's beautiful. That is so
Right.
beautiful. I think taking risks and also being smart, right? Up to the point of taking that risk, being really smart, trying to use all of the information we have at hand so we can get to that cliff point of taking the risk and then very stupidly actually taking that risk, right? I think that's the
Hmm.
moment in which I think of stupidity. You have to be a little
Little
stupid
stupid.
to jump off the cliff. So
Yeah.
even if you have all that data, you're still at a cliff. You're still
Hmm.
probably at something that you've never done before, you've never experienced before. I experienced this myself when I did over 800 daily consecutive videos on LinkedIn. That's actually how I got
Oh, that
called
was
the Oprah
yeah.
of LinkedIn.
That was insane. I don't know what you were thinking.
That was long-term, absolute clinical insanity. And I'll say this, for the first 3 months, I lost a bunch of friends. I lost a bunch of people that were colleagues that I thought we'd be friends forever. We'd talk to each other forever. And they just said, this is the dumbest thing you have ever done in your entire life. And they're like, you should be making these videos on YouTube. You should be making them,
Hmm.
at the time's 2017, on Facebook, which now look at that advice. How hilarious is that advice?
Yep.
Um, but they were like, you need to be doing it on a platform that everyone else is doing it on. And I very stupidly at the time was like, I'm really just creatively enjoying this. Like for me, it was fun. I was building a community. The first few videos I did got maybe 10 likes, which was very exciting for me because I was like, these are 10 strangers liking my videos. And I think at the time I had 300 connections. And when that grew to 3,000 connections, I was like, I'm famous, And it's so
Yeah.
funny because at 3,000, I thought I was famous. I thought at the time I was more famous than I think I am now at over 100,000 followers because I was like, these are all strangers. They didn't need to connect with me. They weren't people I necessarily even worked with before. They just discovered me through my content. But that was a long-term insanity I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But the good thing about doing that and just being really stupid for an extended period of time that I believed in is it also opened doors for me that no one else necessarily got. So I got asked to write for Forbes. I got asked to be in the Adobe Ambassador program. I got asked to do all of these things because of this long-term moment where there is nothing guaranteed. I had no one else was doing the same thing. And even to this day, no one else has beaten my streak of actual 800 daily consecutive videos, not created by AI, 100% created by me, that 90% of them featured me in them. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a wild, wild time.
All right. In a moment, I'm going to ask you for your yes and story. Before we do
Yes.
that, how did you get hooked up with the Archie comics?
Okay, so I got hooked up with Archie Comics. First of all, I have read Archie since I was a wee little tot, right?
That's funny.
I
Yeah.
have read Archies. I used to collect them out of those cardboard bins that they have at every used bookstore. Every used bookstore probably has one Archie comic floating around somewhere, one Archie
Mm-hmm.
tome, and I would go into that store and I would purchase that Archie comic. So first of all, I just want to establish I have been a fan of Archie truly for my entire life. I have been a fan. And when I was writing for Forbes, I wanted to cover some of these legacy or interesting brands that people don't always talk about because it's just not, I would say, cool to talk about. Another nickname that I have in the press is the Queen of Uncool.
Okay.
So I love things that are a little or a lot of bit uncool. And so I really want to cover Archie. So I personally reached out to the Archie team. I said, hey, I'd love to cover you guys and cover just kind of historically as a brand what you've done and also what you're doing now. That's really fascinating. And I cited all these things because I follow the brand. I know what they do. It's wonderful. And I became friends with the president of Archie Comics. And when I became friends with him, he's like, well, Goldie, what are your goals? Like, what would you like to accomplish in life? And this is when luck meets preparation equals opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have had multiple Archie stories truly in my head forever. I had one Archie story, and I know if I ever got the opportunity to write it, I would write this Archie story. So I said, Mike, here's the Archie story. I would love to, at some point in my life, right, write this Archie story for you guys. If you can make it happen sometimes in the next 50 years before, I would love to write this one story. The pitch, of course, for me was so clear because I knew exactly the story. I know all the characters that are the main characters. And I pitched this story and he said, great, let's do it.
Wow.
And I got to write this exact story, which is the first Archie comic, and I've written more since then. But the first one I ever wrote is they're at Pop's Diner,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because they wanted me to write during Halloween. That's fine. I added the Halloween layer to it. But they're all thinking back on past experiences at Pop's Diner that they had over Halloween. So for Jughead, he's eating burgers with his dog. For Archie and Betty, Team Betty.
Mm-hmm.
Betty has a very sweet moment where she and Archie are dressed in matching Halloween costumes and they share a burger together. Veronica pulls out her Amex, unbranded Amex, of course, gold card and is like, I'm going to buy food for everyone here. Reggie is annoying as always. And then of course, Archie as a band saves the day. where they perform at the end because somehow the band that was supposed to perform didn't. And so it's all of them in cute costumes. And also because I love dad jokes, and this is why I'm so primed to write for Archie Comics, it's a bunch of burger puns and pickle puns and things like that. So, but I knew what this was so clearly. And I think if you meet somebody that is your door opener and you know that one ask so clearly, and I'm sure Kelly, you've experienced this yourself and with the students that you've worked with, when they know the one ask and they meet that one person, it is instant. It's magnets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because also if they can't do it for you at the time, they will know your ask is so clear and simple that they will keep you in mind until that opportunity can potentially open up, or a similar opportunity can open up, because you're not asking them. I didn't say, hey, can I write like 20 issues of Archie Comics? Can I do this? Can I like write my own like art? I just said I have one story. It's 5 panels. It is exactly this. It has exactly these characters. This is the beginning, save the cat. This is the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story.
Oh, I love it. All right. We always end the podcast asking our guest for a yes and story. Do you have one for us?
Yes. So my yes and story is, when I blew up on LinkedIn, I was in the middle of what I like to call a sabbatical, which is a funny way of saying I was unemployed, but it's very fancy, right? So I was in my 1-month sabbatical, and I started getting people who were requesting that I consult for them. And I had never done really consulting work in the past. I didn't have an agency to consult them under. So I said yes, and in this moment, I said, yes, I'd love to consult with you. And I also created an agency, Warm Robots, to house my amazing consulting work. And then when they said, can you do more consulting work? I said, yes. And I like to also say that I can do this, this, and this. So I was building my agency and my offerings in real time based off what people were asking me to do. And that was my, I would say, yes and moment that really set me up to be an entrepreneur.
And that's everything we've been talking about, right? That's that idea of, you're prepared to take advantage of something in the moment, even though you might not know what that next thing is. You say yes, you figure it out. You're going to make mistakes along the way, but people, generally speaking, when they're hiring you or backing you, however you want to put it, they're backing the person.
Yes.
And they get it when they see the person who's like, oh no, they're passionate about it. They care. They will figure it out.
Yeah, and I think that enthusiasm, to me, genuine enthusiasm is its own form of charisma, right?
Yeah.
I think that we often think charisma, wow, it's so undefinable. It's a sparkle in the air, right? I remember years ago, I met Brad Pitt with one of my friends who's a delightful model, a stunning, stunning person. And he looked at us and I was like, oh, like the sun hit my eye, right? He has charisma just like radiating off of him as a human. And I remember thinking, though, that so much of charisma is that undeniable confidence that you bring to the table. It's not ego. It's that confidence. It's that enthusiasm. And if you can find that in yourself, you will naturally have charisma.
The book is called Personal Branding for Introverts. Goldie Chan, thank you for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much for having me.